Hello, I'm Ian Dale from LBC, and I'm here to tell you about this fantastic book, Eyes and Ears by Sir David Amess. It's the book that everyone is talking about in the Houses of Parliament, and if they're not, they should be. It's not David's autobiography, but there's lots of autobiographical stuff in it, lots of anecdotes about the way that Parliament works or doesn't work. And anybody that gets to the opportunity to hear David talk about the book is in for an absolute treat. I spent an hour talking to him on my Ian Dale All Talk podcast, so do download that. But if you have the chance to see him live, being interviewed about it, do take the opportunity. It really is a great read, and he is a great listener. I've known him since 1983 when he was first elected, which ages me and him. We're both West Ham fans. And he's just been a brilliant MP. He champions his constituency like no other MP does. He stands up for people, and I think he's been the exemplification of what a good MP is. So do read the book, Eyes and Ears by Sir David Amess.
Next month, a book which I have written called Eyes and Ears, A Survivor's Guide to Westminster, will be published, part of which covers Brexit. And yes, by inference, everyone will be in the book. Would my right honourable friend agree with me that the last general election was not fought on how political parties might handle the coronavirus pandemic, but was categorically about ensuring that the result of the 2016 referendum was implemented in full? Will my right honourable friend confirm that that is what he intends to see happen?
Prime Minister. I can indeed, Mr. Speaker, and I congratulate my right honourable friend on his new book.
And if you were to read his excellent book, Madam Deputy Speaker, Eyes and Ears, probably available in all good bookshops, you would be aware that he is the proud patron of the Conservative Animal Welfare Foundation and has devoted much of his life to campaigning on behalf of our furry friends.
Good evening, everyone, and welcome to my virtual book tour event. If you would like to ask me any questions during this premiere, please use the live chat box on the screen and I will do my best to answer your question. If you would like to purchase my book and support one of the 3 charities I'm raising money for with the sales, there are links in the description to Ian Dale's Politicos or Amazon. You can also get the book directly from the publishers, Luath Press, or through your own Member of Parliament, who I'm sure will be more than happy to collect a copy from my office at the House of Commons. I hope you enjoy the evening.
Hello everyone. Well, I am delighted to say as part of my virtual book tour, I've reached Northern Ireland virtually. So thank you for tuning in to this event. We are joined by sort of a latter-day Michael Parkinson called Ian Paisley. And later we're going to be joined by another Irish Member of Parliament, Carla Lockhart. Now, Ian, you are political royalty. It's probably me who needs introducing to the viewers, not yourself. But look, I've written this book called Eyes and Ears, A Survivor's Guide to Westminster. Any profit goes to a charity, and you, Ian, and Carla have got the task of interviewing me. So, Ian, before we start the interview, would you tell our audience something about yourself?
Well, first of all, congratulations, David, on writing this long-awaited tell-all book about your parliamentary activity, your view, your bird's-eye view of the various activities and indeed scandals that may or may not have taken place. And so I really am looking forward to reading all the tittle-tattle because, David, everyone knows you are a great man for tittle-tattle. And
Got it.
a great man for it. And I became a Member of Parliament in 2010 when I was in my 40s. I suppose I've been in and around Parliament since I was a little child, because my dad was a member of Parliament from June 1970 until he retired in 2010. And so I certainly, this place beats through my heart and through my blood. It's great to be a parliamentarian. It's great to have the opportunity to do things for your community. And it's a pleasure to meet characters like David Amess, Sir David Amess, nonetheless.
Ian, you haven't mentioned your mother.
Yeah, I suppose I'm in the unusual position where both my mother and father were in the House of Lords whilst I was a member of Parliament. It's quite a rare occurrence. My mother, Baroness St George's, she became a peer in 2007, a life peer in 2007, and she is now subsequently retired. She's in her 90th year, but she's very healthy, very sprightly, but believes that she doesn't and shouldn't take up space coming backwards and forwards to London. Leave it to someone much younger than her, who's about 70 or 75. You know?
Well, Ian, if you had told me, listeners, if you'd have said that here I am, a dyed-in-the-wool Catholic, being interviewed by the son of Ian Paisley, it's incredible. But although we were of different faiths, as far as I'm concerned, there's only one God. And your father, Ian, and your mother, towering figures, and certainly your late father was one of the best orators I'd ever heard. And when he got to his feet in the chamber of the House of Commons, he dominated proceedings, and you certainly couldn't shout him down.
He was a big personality, David. Big personality, and
big shoes for you to fill, of course.
Yeah. Well, don't try. Be your own person. Probably the lesson in life. Imitation is not a good form of flattery. You should actually be your own person. That's what he always told me to be. He didn't want to raise a clone or a clown. No. He wanted to make sure that people do their own thing. But you're right. When he spoke, people listened largely because they had to, because he was so loud.
Yeah. But just before you start interviewing me, because I think, it's not only going to be people in Ulster who are going to be looking at this, there'll be all sorts of people. And I feel, although I've been in Parliament a long time, I really do need some educating. I mean, Carla will say something about that later, but I need a bit of education about what the situation is regarding Brexit and Northern Ireland at the moment. So could you bring everyone up to date, please?
Yeah, and I'm going to ask you some questions about that, David, but in true Parkinson style, I'm going to ask you some questions first.
Go on then, go on.
So tell us, I mean, you're the member for Southend. You're an East End boy. Tell us about Southend, because it should be a city. Anytime I hear you speaking about Southend, you're demanding that it's made a city. So tell us about it, because you're really passionate about your local area.
So, as you say, Ian, born in the East End of London into what my children will now get out the violin saying it's poverty. Southend was really the nearest place to going abroad. It was the nearest seaside resort, but of course it's just sort of at the end of the Thames estuary. And a big thrill as a child was to go the 30, 40 miles to Southend. And I don't know about you, I knew your father did, Ian, but can you walk on water?
Well, only if there's a high shore bank.
Okay. Well, if you go to Southend, you can walk on water because we've got the longest pier in the world. And there's a train that takes you the 1.5 miles out into the Thames estuary. And it's famous for mussels, cockles, fish and chips, the best ice cream in the world, Rossi's. We've got the best choirs. We've got all sorts of artistic designers. We're a centre of excellence in terms of learning. And of course, before me, Ian, the seat was represented, and this is unique, for 100 years by the Guinness family, who of course have got Irish connections. Yeah. And it was Lord and Lady Ivor, then Chips Channon. I mean, you're trying to tease our viewers, Ian, by suggesting that I like tittle tattle. I'm a mere amateur when it comes to tittle tattle. If you read Chip Channon's diary, crikey, what a different world it was then. And then after Chip's Channon, it was Paul Channon, and then it was down to me. So I've got
You've
very
been
strong.
there. You've been there. I mean, you're an institution now. I mean, 1983.
Yeah.
And I mean, that is a very, very long time as part. It shows the people really, either they haven't found you out or they really like you, David. And I suspect they actually really like you.
But the reality,
really good. I mean, to be fair, you must be a really good MP.
Well, look, the reason I called it a survivor's guide to Westminster, because when I first started, Ian, and you made mistakes, there was no social media, no internet. People wrote letters, which took 3 or 4 days to get to. Now, as soon as you make a mistake, it's out there for the whole world to see. It's on YouTube. It's on the internet. It's a complete nightmare now. So throughout the 4 decades that I've been an MP now, I've seen people involved in all sorts of scandals. I don't even know what a scandal is now, frankly, anymore. But it was a different way of putting pressure on them. The House of Commons, believe it or not, Ian, it was always full. And if you came off the wrong end of a parliamentary debate, that could often be the end of it for you. Nowadays, the chamber doesn't have that impact on people. It's the internet and social media that tends to bring them down. And I think, you know, if you go on the Wikipedia, don't do it, folks. You can find all sorts of things about myself, and it's surviving all this pressure. It takes a great toll on the individual and their families. And, you know, sadly, I'll touch a bit about it in the book, Ian. There's been a few colleagues committed suicide. I mean, can you believe this, Ian, that one MP was blackmailing another MP because of their sexuality, and he was living with his parents, and the parents woke up in the morning and the chap had hung himself. I didn't know him particularly well. I didn't know the other MP blackmailing him, but all sorts of things like that. Another colleague on my side who was as dapper could be. You would have thought he was quite well off. You didn't think he had a care in the world. And we were doing an all-night sitting. It was Douglas Hogg was the minister. It was all about firearms. And eventually, Dennis Skinner was getting us to vote physically through every division lobby. Well, you know, Ian, that takes quite a while. And we used a special procedure whereby you just voted in your place in the chamber. Well, I literally sat next to this colleague all night. So I got to know him pretty well. A week later, he was found in his car, abandoned somewhere, a hose pipe directed into the car, and it was all to do with financial problems. You know, I was sort of thinking to myself, if only he'd shared it with me, if only he'd shared it with others. So, yeah, people take pressure in a different way, but
it's really pressured here. I mean, our jobs we're so under the spotlight, and you've seen this over the years, and your family now gets put under the spotlight. And the pressure on that does take its toll. I mean, people talk about mental health. I think something like over a third of all members of parliament who are married, their marriages break up easily, but not even because of other people involved, but just because of the pressure that's actually on them. So it really is. I don't think people understand, even in today's day and age, how pressured a life it is. And people like you have been able to take it in your stride and get a good balance. It's because you've got a strong faith, David, that you have that balance in your life, that you have perspective. Because I find a lot of our colleagues don't have perspective.
No, Ian, as you know, it doesn't always go down well when politicians talk about their faith. I do have a very strong faith. When one former Prime Minister tried to use faith, in a certain way, it backfired. But
Is that the one who didn't do God?
yeah,
Yeah.
I just believe that there is something else, something more important than us, and you sort of hang on to that belief in times of adversity. It does become pretty scary. And Ian, I'm delighted to say that our colleague Carla is now going to join us.
Fantastic.
So isn't that fabulous?
Upper
And
is now joining us. The Irish Mafia is now in charge of the room.
Well, I'm delighted that Carla has joined us. And Carla, at this point, could you just tell our audience something about yourself? Because this podcast isn't all about me, David Amos. I think our viewers would like to know a little bit more about you. And obviously, Ian's been an MP longer than you have. But Carla, can you tell our audience something about your good self?
Okay, my name is Carla Lockhart and I am from the Premier constituency in Northern Ireland, Upper Bann. Ian laughs, but it's true and he knows it. Upper Bann, I have been an MP since 2019. I was elected probably more stumbled on being an MP as opposed to something I had planned. I've been in politics most of my working career. I was a councillor, moved to the Assembly and now at Westminster, and I have to say I'm enjoying my role in Westminster. Westminster is big politics and I'm enjoying getting involved in those bigger issues and trying to make a real change in Northern Ireland. I have a real heart for my community, very focused on Upper Bann, delivering for the people of Upper Bann. I'm married, I have a little boy called Charlie, he's 2. Was 2 in May, and he is an absolute handful. He takes after his dad, obviously. But that's basically my life, family and politics.
And Carla, you followed David Simpson.
Yes, I did. David was a great constituency MP.
What is David up to now then, Carla?
David is back in his business and he is very engaged in that again, and I think he's very much enjoying being at home more and enjoying the business life. That's where he came from and that was where his heart always has lay.
Well, Carla, you've joined us at a time when Ian, who's been grilling me, he's done a real Michael Parkinson job. You're going to do the Oprah Winfrey task of this. We were talking about faith.
What?
And I've got to say, Carla, that I think the way you have been prepared to put your head above the parapet in something that I feel very strongly about, pro-life issues, I absolutely commend you for that, because it's so much more important that we have a lady as an advocate on this issue. And I just want to commend you, because when I first started, Carla, the pro-life organisation in Westminster was absolutely Rolls Royce. We had my mentor, a chap called Sir Bernard Brain, who was the MP for Castle Point. Ian's father was strongly involved in it. And we faced many battles on pro-life issues. And increasingly, we seem to have weakened in terms of our parliamentary numbers, frankly. And I just feel, Ian and Carla, very disappointed that we haven't been able to do something about the time period for which you can have an abortion. I don't understand that if a baby now can survive at 22, 23 weeks, why we haven't tackled that. But, each time we sort of try and do something, we would make the situation worse. So, Carla, as a new MP, what would you like to ask me?
Well, I suppose I would ask for your advice. You've been on a journey, and I've enjoyed learning a little bit about it through your book. So I would like to ask you what your advice to me would be as a young MP, new MP. How do you deliver for your constituents? How do you use Westminster as a vehicle to
Yeah,
deliver for your constituents?
I mean, Ian's been winding me up. I haven't deliberately been nasty about colleagues. I'm only halfway through my political career, Ian, and I've got to be shoulder to shoulder with colleagues when we vote. I know that one of our colleagues has done a kiss and tell book. There's a little section there when I've spoken about types of MPs, and it's up to the individual whether or not they fit into it. But this is the way I see it, Carla. Before I became an MP, I was in recruitment for many years. So I've interviewed literally thousands of people. With our audience today, we're doing this virtually on a Zoom call. There is no substitute for eye contact meeting people. And in terms of parliamentary colleagues, yeah, I'm going to say it, be very, very careful who you trust. Now, I know, remind the audience how many Northern Irish members of Parliament there are.
18.
18, okay.
Oh.
Here is an iPhone. These didn't exist when I first became an MP. And you go onto it and there's something called WhatsApp. And there is a WhatsApp group. You've got 18 of you, not all the same party. There were 365 Conservative MPs. The idea that you would actually leak something from a WhatsApp group to the media, it is shocking beyond belief. We're supposed to be honourable and right honourable colleagues, and something can be leaked from an MP's WhatsApp group. Terrible. You also know, Carla, that we have something called the 1922 Committee, Conservative MPs. Now we have colleagues tweeting as the meetings go on, which are private and confidential. So I would say, Carla, with your own colleagues, be very, very careful who you trust, because it seems to me honour's gone out of the window and you make an innocent little remark and then the next meeting you're pigeonholed by journalists in Portcullis House and it's all in the national media. And that, you got a lovely 2-year-old, and Ian and I were saying, because, well, Ian's children are older, mine are much older. And it certainly, with one of my 5 children, perhaps 2 of my 5 children, it did have an impact really in their early years. So I would always say, Carla, do be careful who you trust. But look, I love Parliament. This isn't a race. And I do urge new colleagues, you've had a rubbish time because of the pandemic, but get to know the chamber, get a feel of the chamber, get a feel of your parliamentary colleagues, watching how they address the chamber. When I first started, the power of oratory was so important. And I was telling Ian when it came to scandals and pressure, if you were making a speech in the chamber, it would be absolutely packed. And it took a lot of guts and courage to get to your feet when half the time people would be trying to shout you down, depending who was keeping order. And I think you need to get a feel of it. I think you need to spend a little time. Look, you have induction courses, which we don't have now. A little time spend with the clerks, learning procedure. You don't have to be in government to get things on the statute book. In my book, I tell you how to get a 10-minute rule bill on the statute. To get a piece of legislation called a handout bill, you could get that into law. You don't have to wait. I think it was 16th or 18th time that I went into the ballot for private members bills, and I got the Warm Homes and Energy Conservation Bill onto the statute book. So I think it's about learning with people. And the final thing I would say, Carla, is I believe in putting your constituents first. Now, you stand on a manifesto and you've got to be true to that manifesto. But it didn't matter that I represented a challenging seat for 15 years, Basildon, and then went on to what some colleagues would regard as a more comfortable seat in Southend West. I've never taken my colleagues, my constituents for granted. Keep on meeting people, bashing on those doors, building up you're a young lady, you're at the start of your career, and I'm sure you've got much to look forward to. But it's really giving your constituents the reassurance that you're on their side. So, Carla, I mean, you flatter asking me for advice. My children sometimes ask me for advice and they don't take it. I think something else I wanted to mention, Carla, is the tea room. The tea room used to be the absolute engine room of picking up tips from colleagues. As you know, Labour sit at one end, the Conservatives at another end. I think you sit down with us. It's always worthwhile, really, spending a little bit of time in the tea room. The final thing I would say before going on to Ian, Carla, is I think it is a great shame that there isn't quite the connection there used to be between the Commons and the Lords. We used to have much more contact between each other. And of course, there are so many people who used to be MPs in the Lords now. I just hope that when we get back to operating normally without the constraints of the pandemic, that we can get back to sharing ideas and taking advice for some of the people who are in the other house. But Ian, you don't need any advice, do you, Ian?
I need lots of advice.
You're your own
My
man.
problem is not taking it, David, David, tell us about some of the big characters you've met. I mean, you came into the house, Maggie Thatcher was the Prime Minister. There were massive characters, historical figures now. Tell us a bit about that. What was like being the boy David amongst all these giants?
Ian and Carla, I was blessed in being a member when Margaret Thatcher was at her peak, from 1983 to 1990. And to me, she's way above there in terms of stature of prime ministers. And Ian, I will never forget, I mean, Enoch Powell, he was a giant. I mean, some people just think of Enoch Powell because what they perceive to be his views on race or otherwise. But all I can tell you both is he was a giant of a figure, one of the best orators I've ever heard. His office used to be the House of Commons Library. And when his name came up on the Annunciator, people piled into the chamber to listen to what he had to say. But Ian and Carla, I think he sort of slightly was unkind at PM's questions. You see, we used to have PM's questions on a Tuesday and a Thursday for 15 minutes. Far, far better than the half an hour that we get now on a Wednesday. And Enoch, who, of course, as you know, had been a Conservative Member of Parliament, I thought had a very good relationship with Margaret. He sort of took her to task at Prime Minister's question time. I'm not going to repeat exactly what he said because Carla and Ian, as you know, you can't call another member a liar. But he was rather sharp at PM's questions, and I think that was unfortunately a giant of a figure. It would be for both of you to perhaps tell me offline, did he cut the mustard in terms of Northern Ireland? But on the Conservative side, Michael Heseltine at his peak was absolutely extraordinary. commanded the place. I was there when he had his contretemps with Leon Britton about Westland's helicopter, but absolutely a commanding figure. Fast forwarding it, it was, look, both of you haven't been in Parliament when we've had a dominant Labour government, but we did in 1997. There were only 165 Conservatives. Michael Shersby, the MP for Uxbridge, he died within a month. We were down to 164. Tony Blair absolutely dominated the scene. There were so many Labour MPs, just one short of 400. That's why there are 3 columns in the division lobbies. There only ever used to be 2. But whereas in the Conservative side, with the Ulster support of the Ulster Unionists, we used to get through the lobbies very quickly, it used to mean that divisions were delayed. And that's why they introduced the 3 columns there now, where the clerks sit, to try and speed up the whole process. I'm no fan of Tony Blair. I'm sorry, I'm not. And to me, things that have happened since he left Parliament, but he dominated the place. I found that Gordon Brown was much more straightforward in one sense than Tony Blair was, but of course, similarities between him and Theresa May. They both had the opportunity to call an early election. Theresa called an early election, got it wrong. We lost our majority. Gordon Brown didn't call an early election, and that was a big mistake. I think he would have won. So but these are very, very dominant figures. And on the Labour side, I was fortunate enough, Ian, to be there when, look, Michael Foot's only sort of remembered by some people wearing his donkey jacket at the cenotaph. And of course, your dad, Ian, used to lay the wreath at the cenotaph. And Michael Foot, in my time, he was posh Labour, great orator, an extraordinary figure. And Tony Benn, the father of our present colleague now, I was fortunate enough to be there when he was at the top of his game, a great orator. I saw Shirley Williams. There's a long list of people, but fast forwarding it to 2010, David Cameron. I didn't know David Cameron at all well. And the idea that he would become leader, I thought, well, crikey, the chap's only been in Parliament for 2 minutes. I'm going to be supporting David Davis, one of my colleagues now. But, you know, they all made their pitch at the Conservative Party conference and David got it. David Cameron and David Davis didn't. And I have to say, I was dead against a coalition. I got it wrong. It worked quite well. Frankly, he managed to stitch up the Liberals. And David Cameron and George Osborne, a little bit like Tony Blair and Gordon Brown, they absolutely dominated the Commons and were fantastic at the dispatch box. And I feel that we're all Brexiteers, aren't we, folks?
Of course.
Yeah. Well, I think it's an absolute tragedy what happened to David Cameron and George Osborne following the referendum.
Do you think Cameron should have stayed on and led?
Well, yeah, and I told him so. I was with a group of colleagues who told him that. And I think they were both very young. And to leave Parliament at such an early age, I thought was a tremendous shame. It sort of threw my party into disarray. We had a number of runners and riders, and I'm not going to comment on, before you ask me, Ian, on the present Prime Minister and her
but you can comment on this, Dave. Is Boris a giant in terms of the current?
You're not going to tell.
In terms of the current Parliament, is he a giant? Will he be?
He is one of the most unusual parliamentarians I've ever worked with. Very, very unusual. But he got Brexit done. So at the end
of part of it done. He didn't get it done in Northern Ireland.
Yeah.
Here.
Left us with protocol, David, which you have got to fix.
Viewers, look, Carla and Ian are supposed to be interviewing me, but can we just take 3 or 4 minutes to hear your perspective, both of you, re Northern Ireland and Brexit?
Look, we want Brexit done as well. The Northern Ireland Protocol has put in place a friction in all trade between Northern Ireland and GB. And when you consider that GB is Northern Ireland's single largest market, so for poultry, for red meats, for milk, for manufactured goods, 70–80% of everything that we produce in those areas, GB is our main market. And there's now friction in that market. You have to fill in forms. You have to, some of the goods can't be delivered. Some of the raw materials we can't get across because Europe has deemed that Northern Ireland is in their customs zone, and therefore it has to be treated like a different country than the rest of GB, which is an absolute disgrace, and we're being penalised and our businesses are suffering as a result. Meanwhile, the EU is laughing at us because they're doing more checks on goods coming into Northern Ireland than they're doing in the rest of goods coming in from Russia, from Belarus, from Amsterdam, for goods on main terminals like Hamburg and Amsterdam. I mean, none of those checks are anywhere near the number that we're having to do, and yet we are a population the size of Greater Manchester. So we're being punished because we supported Brexit, and it's disgraceful and it's hampering our business, and we've got to get it fixed. And David, it's entirely up to your Prime Minister and his 80 majority to fix it, and he can fix it. So we're saying to you, another chapter, a prologue in your book, how David Amos got Brexit finished for Northern Ireland.
Okay. Well, look.
Your pleasure.
We are kindred spirits, and we've got to work together, Ian, and perhaps not in front of the audience. I need to be educated what I need to do to make sure that Boris changes his vision for Northern Ireland at the moment, and you can hold me to that, Carla. And you were talking about big figures, Ian. I've known so many secretaries of state for Northern Ireland, going back to sort of Peter Brook, Mo Molan, any number of them. Ian, which secretaries of state then have been most useful, including for Brexit, for Northern Ireland? Who've been the top of the list?
Well, listen, they've all been a very interesting bunch, and they've all had their downside, but a number of them have been very good. So, for example, John Reid, the Labour MP. Yeah. Now, John was, as you know, Tony Blair's Mr. Fix-It. So he was in health, he was in defence, he was in a number of other departments, education and others. He came to Northern Ireland. He was billed as a Celtic supporting anti-unionist Secretary of State. And to be fair to the guy, he got Northern Ireland very good. He got the needs of unionists very well. He understood the place, and he worked very hard to in Northern Ireland. So usually the people who came with a lot of baggage, they ended up probably, at least having the character to get through that and to work through it. You've mentioned Mo Molan. I think we could all tell our own Mo Molan story. Maybe we shouldn't. But Mo was a very, very colourful character and not afraid to speak her mind. And as you know, incredibly popular in the Labour benches.
Tragic what happened to her.
Yeah, tragic, tragedy with cancer and everything, but
she
it was amazing, David. She got through it. She didn't let it stop her. There was a woman who was being treated regularly for cancer, and she still took on one of the most demanding jobs at a very demanding time. I mean, what a lesson to young people. Look what this woman is able to do despite what's being thrown at her physically. So a remarkable character in that way. I mean, I'd have disagreed with Mo on a whole host of things, but as a character and as a person, I think she really did have that. Been some really good Northern Ireland secretaries as well. Our current Secretary of State, I think we get on with him very well. Yeah,
Brandon?
I think Brandon's very very straightforward.
Oh,
He tells it as it is.
okay.
You know, and that's what we need in politics. You know, you need straight talking people, and Brandon's straight talking, and
And his deputy is Walker.
yeah. Walker's an absolute gentleman. I'll say that for the guy. You know.
Oh, well, no, I'm really good. And then just one final thing before we get back to the book, because I'd be interested in both of you, your take on it. The peace process, because look, Ian, I never thought I'd see two sides together at Stormont. You know, I remember graphically that day. Do you give the credit to John Major, or who do you give the credit to?
I give it to the people of Northern Ireland.
Okay.
They were prepared to look. It sounds humorous, but it's true. When the IRA stopped killing us, it made it easier for us to get on and solve the problem. And I mean, our community was being bombed, was being shot at, it was being threatened. And whenever that stopped, despite the fact that we had an enemy and we had differences, when they stopped killing you, it's actually easier to start putting that behind you and to get on. There's a huge lot of legacy issues that we have to still work our way through.
But it's the people of Northern Ireland, you would say,
of Northern Ireland.
Not Clinton and Blair and all that.
They were very necessary leadership. I mean, they showed necessary leadership, David. And I mean, to be fair, John Major, I mean, he started the process.
Yeah.
But it was incredibly difficult. It's still incredibly difficult when you consider that people are in government today who have got records longer than your arm. And that will never ever be held accountable for them, whereas in other countries that have been gone through the Hague Convention and they'd be done for war crimes. But
so
with those people in government.
If Airey Neve and Ian Gower hadn't been murdered in the way they were, would the history of Northern Ireland have been different?
It depends if the government at the time, if Airey Neve had decided that they were going to have a end to the Troubles by way of a combated end to the Troubles. We had a negotiated end to the Troubles, which leads to a very, very different outcome. Now, you see this, if you study conflict around the world, when you look at how the Tamil Tigers, they were put out of existence in 9 days. After 40 years of struggle, they were just bombed out of existence. We now have had 30 years of trying to come to terms with that in terms of legacy. In Northern Ireland, we negotiated after 40 years, and we're still trying to come to terms with it in terms of legacy. So you choose your, you choose your actual fix when it comes to solving conflict. There's never an easy answer, and there's never a right answer.
I think Ian is being quite modest here, and I think one of the main figures and the main players in Northern Ireland was Dr. Paisley, Ian's father. He was the person who delivered so much of what we have today, because he had the charisma, the vision, and the following to really deliver on what he did. And he took huge risks, huge personal risk, political risk. But I firmly believe, and I'm not just saying that because Ian is on call. Him, along with Peter and Nigel, took immense risk for the people of Northern Ireland.
Well, thank you for sharing that with everyone, with our listeners, because Ian's father was a giant. Literally, but in the way he eventually accepted what must have been a very, very difficult situation. And Carla and Ian, before we get back to the book, in my lifetime, other than your father, Ian, I suppose the most famous politician was Bernadette Devlin. Now, I wasn't in the Commons when she slapped Reggie Mording and all of that. Is she still active in politics, or not now?
She's a community activist, isn't she? I think she's still very much active in the community, does a lot of stuff for migrant workers.
Oh, does she?
Yeah, she had her own kind of, was it a blog or a YouTube type channel? So she's a person of her own outspoken viewpoint. She's definitely not rodeoed into a particular community or a particular outlet. So she'd still be a very outspoken woman, yeah.
And Carla, I should say that in the time I've been an MP, the SNP were a very small party, and it's only been recently that they've had so many MPs. And I am so keen that the four parts of our country stay together. And as a Conservative, there is no way I want to see any weakening, which very much includes Northern Ireland. So I won't say.
Yeah, I think that is our ultimate priority. We need people. There is a thought in Northern Ireland that the British government don't want us. They would sell us out, and the way in which even the protocol has continued and has caused constitutional and economic problems in Northern Ireland, it does feel that violence or the threat of violence pays with the British government. Whereas those of us who are law-abiding citizens who didn't get involved in what others did, you know, we are the people that are sidelined, and it is the people who committed some of the most heinous crimes in Northern Ireland are rewarded.
Well, we've got to change that, Carla. I mean, I don't know all the Northern Irish MPs because of the pandemic, so I hadn't quite understood the sensitivities, what went on after the election. But I'm just getting to grips to it. And I think it's so important. I mean, Ian, you said we've got a majority of 80, but we've really got to support you because it's vital in terms of the strength of the union. Now, Carla, is there anything in particular that you'd like to ask me about, well, the building? Are you happy with the building?
Oh yes, it's absolutely spectacular. I often walk through the corridors and think, how did I actually arrive in this place? And I'm sure you still do,
Oh, I do.
even though you've
And
been
there is no way, Carla, I want us to move out of it.
I know.
think,
I know.
You know, I was on the admin committee for a while, so I know we've got to be very careful with all the electrics, the sewers, and all of that. But I think once we move out, to be out of the building for 10 years is totally unacceptable. So I'm glad that you get the buzz still from the building. And I mean, Ian, you're on the same page, aren't you? You don't want to move
David,
out.
I'm not. I love the building. That's because I love the building. I want to see it properly refurbished.
Oh, there we go, Carl.
brought up the standard. That this building it oozes history out of every pore, out of every crack, and it would be a shame. I mean, in the last couple of years, there's been 16 fires in this building.
Yeah.
They've had to be put out. There's a permanent night guard that walks the entire basement of this building 24/7, putting out electrical faults and electrical fires. This is a catastrophe waiting to happen. It's got to be fixed. I think you're right. We can't be put out of it for 10 years. It could be done probably in 3 to 6 years maximum. And we could have the Mother of Parliament's infrastructure protected and guaranteed for generations going forward.
So where did you stand, Ian, about us moving into the Lords?
Well, if we could rotate it like that, that would be, I think, a halfway house. It's, however, I understand from the people who have done this, and I was on the R&R committee.
Yeah.
They told us.
That's why I'm raising it, Ian.
Yeah. They told us that it was impossible to only do it because you'd only be doing half the house, and it's the same infrastructure underneath in the basement. What we'd really need to do is probably, why can't we move across? I mean, the original Parliament was in Westminster Cathedral.
Yeah, I know.
Move us to the Westminster Cathedral.
79 Whitehall.
And move us back.
I mean, Carla, I was there when 79 Whitehall first opened. The giant Department of Health used to be with Social Security, and we were at the Elephant and Castle, and we moved into 79 Whitehall. It's totally unsuitable. And the other big worry, Ian, of course, is the security of the parliamentary estate. So well, anyway, it's a work in process. Now, I think we're sort of coming towards the end of our time.
Yeah, I want to ask you about your charity work. You're a charity man.
One last question. Yeah. I think Carla wants to come in with a question.
No, I wanted to ask, how did you get involved in Endometritis UK? What's your connection there?
Yeah, well, Carla, to be blunt, I'd never heard of endometriosis. And I've got a son and 4 daughters. But a constituent called Carla Cressy came to see me and to say she was suffering from endometriosis. And there are 1.5 million who suffer from this condition, including we've got a few female MPs who've come forward with it. And I'm supporting Endometriosis UK. I'm delighted to say, Carla, that as a result of our connection with them, we've got it in the government strategy to do something to help all the sufferers, not only with their mental health well-being, but in terms of trying to stop these endless surgeries. There's no known cure for the way the cells reproduce themselves, but there is light at the end of the tunnel. So the third of the royalties are going to Endometriosis UK. And you know, Ian, that we chaps aren't quite as good as ladies watching out for our health. So another constituent called Paul Sayer came to see me about prostate cancer, which he was suffering from. Yep. Through a particular technique, he's now well. So a third of that is going towards prostate. Now, Carla and Ian, you both have some constituents with learning difficulties, and a constituent called David Stanley and his wife, who's a member of the Salvation Army, discovered that through the power of music, they can transform the lives of people with learning difficulties. Couldn't you imagine, Carla and Ian, as a newly elected MP, I was taken to South Ockenden and I saw people in straitjackets. Fortunately, that doesn't happen now. And so through the Music Man project, which I know is reaching out to Northern Ireland, yep, we did a show at the London Palladium, a show at the Royal Albert Hall, and when it's safe to do so, we're going across the big pond and we're going to perform on Broadway.
Yeah, but David, you've taken this to all around the world. I mean, you're very modest about it. I mean, I saw you with the honor of being in the Philippines together, and I saw you promoting music amongst children and making sure that musical instruments were distributed amongst children who were in poverty to help them find a way out of that, and to help them with their learning as well. And we visited a little school, I remember, in Philippines, and you were very instrumental in making sure that those instruments were distributed and distributed fairly. And I think it shows that you actually have a really compassionate heart about you, despite what everyone says. David, you actually are quite a nice guy.
Well, thank you for that plug. Yeah, I mean, it's no secret, Ian, but I'm particularly, Carla, love the Philippines and Filipino people. They are so compassionate. They respect the elderly. They're marvelous nurses. And I think, Ian, there were tears in our eyes when we went to that school built on the rubbish dump.
Yeah.
And we saw how just a pencil, Carla, transformed their lives. So yes, thank you for all of that. Well, look, ladies and gentlemen, before you all start weeping when we continue to get even more sentimental, I've got to say to our Northern Irish viewers that in Carla Lockhart and Ian Paisley, you have 2 wonderful, true constituency members of Parliament. And I'm very sorry that the government that I support hasn't totally honoured the commitments over Brexit. And we've got to put that right. And we will put that right.
Man, well said.
Take that as read, Carla and Ian. And we're going to continue to work together because you are fundamental in terms of the United Kingdom. So here we are, ladies and gentlemen, the book, Eyes and Ears, A Survivor's Guide to Westminster. Please do go and buy the book. All the royalties go to charity thank you all so much for viewing this podcast. Bye, everyone.
Bye.
Bye.
This is my journey so far. Where I was born, where I became a councillor, when I was first elected to Parliament, and where I am now the Member of Parliament for. Enjoy my journey. I hope you enjoy reading my book, Eyes and Ears, A Survivor's Guide to Westminster.